This morning's event is so important. No doubt some of the points I've raised about business being too complicated, too expensive, too uncertain will come up in conversation and questioning between you and the Shadow Cabinet. So welcome again. And to guide this discussion, I'm delighted to introduce our chair for this morning, Liam Halligan.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's very nice to be here. I'm an economist. That means I was pretty good at maths at school, but I didn't quite have enough personality to become an accountant. I'm, of course, a columnist at the Telegraph. I've been writing my economics agenda column in the Sunday Telegraph now for 26 years. I started as a child. And seriously, over many years of journalism, both print and broadcast, I've often consulted this organisation. I've often interviewed people from this organisation. I think you guys do a fantastic job. And it's the accountants and the lawyers and the really knowledgeable people like you in this room who really are the spine of the City of London and everything that does for our country. So long may that continue. So I'm here as a journalist. I'm happy to compare this event. It's the kind of thing I do for political parties. If they ask me, I think if you're a columnist, if you're in public life, it's the sort of thing you should do. We've had just now, of course, a budget. The government says it's fixing the foundations of the economy. The Conservatives say it's a budget for Benefit Street. Rachel Reeves' long-awaited budget, of course, just pushed the tax burden up by £30 billion a year on top of last year's £40 billion tax increase. Last year's budget was itself the most punitive, in the sense the most tax-raising budget in real terms for over 30 years. So we are in a historic situation, as all of you all know. Labour are in office with a 1997-style majority, up in the 150s, 60s and 70s, like Tony Blair. But rather than the national debt being 35% of GDP, which it was in 1997, it is, of course, now well north of 90% of GDP. I think it's fair to say, objectively, the government having pushed that figure up. In that context, on the right of politics, the marketplace for ideas is working, despite all the noise. The Conservatives are now pledging detailed cost savings of £47 billion a year, and they say that 23 billion of those annual savings will be on welfare. The party, as you will hear, is trying to champion fiscal responsibility, which isn't always a popular political sell. Well, you'd think that if you followed the broadcast media, but I think some of us know that out there among the so-called silent majority, particularly in times of financial and fiscal stress, there actually is a marketplace for fiscal responsibility. So allow me to introduce first onto stage the Leader of the Opposition, of course, Kemi Badenoch. She's the... And we have Mel Stride, of course, Shadow Chancellor, and Andrew Griffith, Shadow Business Secretary. So Kemi is, of course, the MP for North Essex, formerly Saffron Walden. She's been an MP since 2017. Before politics, she took degrees in engineering and law, worked as a software engineer, worked in a bank, worked famously in the media. So, Kemi, let's start with you. Some people have said you've had quite a combative response to this budget. How do you justify that, and why would your party do better?
It's very easy to justify because I was speaking for all of the people out there who were horrified by the last budget and terrified at what was going to be coming in the one we saw on Wednesday. And I also needed to present a contrast between my team and the Labour Party. Sitting on this table is a strong, united team of people who've worked in the private sector, started our own businesses, have experience in creating growth. We know where money comes from. The party that's running the country right now thinks money grows on trees. What we saw was a budget for benefits, not a budget for growth. And I think, given the state of the economy, it was disgraceful that we ended up with the OBR and the IFS saying that household incomes were going down and it was absolutely dismal for growth. But what has been most extraordinary has been what we've seen in the last few days, which is that the Chancellor appears to have given wrong or false information deliberately to try and get her budget a soft landing. We are at the Institute for Accounting. You all know that if a CEO had done this before their annual meeting, they would be sacked. And that is why Mel has written to the Financial Conduct Authority, the right place, to make sure that this is properly investigated. What we see is issues around financial probity and market abuse. And I do believe that she should resign because of that, because she has given false information, broken promise after promise, given people false hope and false reasons to vote Labour, not been able to stick to them. What she's shown is that she cannot manage the economy. So I'm very happy to be combative in that circumstance. I think the circumstances actually demand combativeness.
Mel Stride, you've been an MP since 2010. You are the MP for Central Devon, the Shadow Chancellor. You also have a business background. You've built and sold businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. Tell us about the big macro picture here. Tell us how and why the Tories have come to the point where you are now pledging £47 billion of welfare savings. And I suggest after the last budget, that figure may actually go up.
So, well, good morning, everybody. Look, I think the answer to the challenges that we face as a country, not just economic challenges, but other challenges around defence and so on, is growth and productivity growth. And that's what we've got to get the solution for. What you've seen in this budget is no growth at all, really. I mean, after this first year, which is actually a downgrade on the growth number from the budget last year, growth in every year of this forecast is down on the spring. And that's not by accident. That's because of the wrong economic choices. So what the Chancellor has done is to load up taxes in breach of her manifesto and the promises that she's made on hard-working people. So we've seen that with the income tax threshold freezes, and instead spend money raised through that taxes on more welfare. And that is at the heart of the socialist way, because that is about redistribution and resources, which is important in economics, but also important in economics is incentives. And what you shouldn't be doing is loading up taxes on the productive part of the economy whilst redistributing to the unproductive part of the economy. And this is a long-standing picture that we've seen with this government. When they came into office, the first thing they did, despite the fact they said they wouldn't do it, was heap £40 billion worth of extra taxes on the economy, 25 billion of it through NICs increases on businesses. That killed growth. That's part of that story of diminished growth. They talked down the economy with a fictitious £22 billion black hole, which extinguished the animal spirits in the economy. But they did what socialists also do, which they went out and borrowed vast amounts of money, spent vast amounts of money, which fed into higher inflation. So the IMF says we will have the highest inflation this year in the G7 and the same next year. And that's why interest rates are higher for longer than they would otherwise be. And on this massive mound of debt that they're creating, the servicing costs are now £100 billion a year, or twice what we spend on defence. So we've got into this doom loop of the wrong decisions, particularly around spending, tax and inflation, that has driven the destruction of her fiscal headroom, which is a recurrent theme now, leading her to take yet more wrong choices around tax. The answer, Liam, is to go on top and control public spending, particularly in the welfare budget. So Kemi and I announced at our conference £47 billion of savings, 23 billion of those in the welfare area. and at least half of that going to bear down on the deficit and the debt, because we are the party of fiscal responsibility. We recognise we have to live within our means, and also getting taxes down, particularly taxes that drive economic growth. And that is our alternative.
And just to be precise, because we are in possibly the most financially numerate room in London at the moment.
Hope so, yes.
That 47, these things really, really matter. The public's watching, the markets are watching. That 47 billion that you're pledging, it's a serious number. That is the annual saving you will get to over the forecast period in terms of how you're looking at the economy.
Yes, so that is, just to get slightly technical, that is the 47 billion is the saving in 29-30. That's the key year for the fiscal targets. And I'll just add one thing to this, Liam, is that people criticised us as a party early on for not coming out with 5-minute quick fixes, right? Where are your policies and so on? The only way you get these numbers to stick is to do the hard yards and the deep thinking. And that's exactly what Kemi has led. And that is why that number that we're now discussing has not been taken down, has not been called out. It has stood the test of time since our conference because it's based on real deep analysis.
That's a long time since your conference, huh?
It seems like years.
In politics.
It does feel like a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I think the bottom line is that there was an alternative to last week's budget. Labour will pretend that this is the only thing that could possibly have done, that could possibly have been done. They have given up even trying to find growth. They're not looking for it. All they're doing now is dividing whatever money is there rather than trying to create it. The Prime Minister is going to give a speech at 10:30, which he will say is all about growth and how they're going to deliver it. No, it won't be. This is a man who, when we said, let's help you get this welfare bill over the line, you need to cut spending, he wasn't interested. He preferred to defer to the backbenchers. The hard left right now have said, we've won. That's what the hard left in his party has said. He says he wants to deregulate. You know, Andrew will talk about the employment rights bill. He doesn't really have an agenda. That is the thing that's worrying me. And what I saw last week was a whole bunch of people who've presided over rising unemployment. They're very happy for all of you to lose your jobs so that they can save their jobs. And I think that is a serious problem.
Yeah. We are going to come to... We are going to come to some media questions, then we're going to have questions from business. Before that, let's hear from Andrew Griffith. Now, Andrew is, of course, the MP for Arundel and South Downs. He's been an MP since 2019 after a sustained career in business. This is a homecoming for Andrew because he is indeed a chartered accountant. He was also at one stage, lots of personality, he is also also at one stage, I think, Andrew, you were the youngest CFO of any FTSE 100 company. So, Andrew, let's talk about we've heard from Kemi on the high politics. We've heard from Mel on the big macro picture. You've been really focused as business secretary on the employment rights bill. You've been focused on the detail of taxation, business property relief, and so on. When you look at this budget and you're told it is a budget for growth, how do you respond to that?
Well, look, that idea, Liam, is clearly nonsensical. I mean, the big thing for business last week, and I've been speaking to businesses ever since the budget, the first thing is you want a budget that's going to inspire confidence. Confidence is the animal spirits. It's what gets people hiring, investing. We had the world's longest run-up to a budget, and that 3-month period not just coincided, it was causal, put business confidence absolutely on the floor. You might have expected some sort of relief rally, and we've not even seen that. So the Institute of Directors has a survey out this morning showing that business confidence is losing to a global pandemic virus as a result of what this government is doing. And that means people won't hire, they won't invest, they won't grow. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's right-hand man, said, look, show me the incentives and I'll tell you the outcome. And the key thing, I think the key thing this government don't understand because of their abject failure to understand business is the incentives, the things that make people get up in the morning and want to found a business, start a business, stick with a business, whether it's business property relief, the family business death tax last week could have seen some repeal, some reversal, some mitigant. We got nothing on either the family business or the family farm death tax. Look at what they're doing on business rates. Publicans have been ringing my phone, and Kate Nichols from Hospitality UK and the British Pub Association all over the weekend, desperate to understand another misleading lie told by the Chancellor that she was going to bear down on business rates. That is not true. They are going up, taking in the combination the upwards revaluation and the removal of reliefs that we Conservatives put in place when we were in government. She did not last week emulate our plan to take 250,000 high street businesses out of business rates entirely. She went in the other direction. And yes, there's some transitional relief, but if the destination is wrong, it doesn't matter how quickly or not you get there. It's the wrong destination, and businesses will be sitting down this morning looking at their prospects and their future. And then finally, you mentioned it, Kemi mentioned it, the Employment Rights Bill, or the Bill for Unemployment. That is a 330-page bill. It is laughable when this government talks about bearing down on red tape. They are spinning up an entire new regulator consisting of former union officials and employment lawyers, their Fair Work agency, that is going to seek to bring cases against employers even when not a single employee complains. So yes, we welcome, as business will, their reversal of their day one rights, the period to 6 months, helped by a very strong Conservative team who's fought that bill every single inch of the way, working as a team. But you don't make a 330-page red tape bill any better by making it a 329-page red tape bill.
Yeah. Andrew Griffith, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we are going to come to questions from the business audience, but before we do that, we're going to have questions from the print and broadcast media, and I think Kemi is going to call those.
Thank you. First question from Harry Horton, ITV.
Thank you very much. Harry Horton, ITV News. My question is about the OBR. Do you think the OBR is still fit for purpose? Do you think it should be abolished? And should the chair, Richard Hughes, have to resign?
It's not the OBR that gave misleading information to the public. That was the Chancellor. So asking the OBR to take the punishment, in my view, is deflecting. A lot of people made decisions based on the information that the Chancellor briefed on the 4th of November when she did that weird breakfast press conference, and on the 10th of November as well. Some people left the country because they were worried about an exit tax. Some people drew down their pensions, an irreversible decision. Others were fixing their mortgage rates. Real decisions were made while she was trying to give her budget good PR. So I don't think that talking about the OBR is where we should be. That is a distraction. There's only one person in the dock right now, and that is Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor. Next question from Amanda Akas, I hope I've said that right, from Sky News.
Yes. Two of your former MPs have just defected to Reform UK, saying they're the only party that has the vision to restore pride in Britain. That's a bit of an indictment of your leadership, isn't it?
Not really. The fact is, those are MPs who want more welfare. I'm being very clear. We are not the welfare party. All the other parties have campaigned to lift the two-child benefit cap, including Reform. And I remember those two MPs, they wanted more and more public spending. They've gone to a party that they think is going to do that. And I think it's very interesting that at a time when Labour is on the ropes, the Chancellor is in the dock, Reform thinks the most important thing is to attack us. That just shows that they're not interested in getting the very best for this country. All they're interested in is low politics and trying to destroy the Conservative Party. We are interested in doing what is right for all those people out there who are struggling, and we're going to stay focused on doing our jobs. Jack Waters, GB News.
Thank you. It was a quick question about whether, well, you spoke about the £23 billion that you're going to save from welfare. I wondered, with half of the 47 billion going on paying off the debt and deficit, which ones you really want to cut on tax to drive growth, particularly for hard-working Britons?
Thank you. So our golden economic rule is how we frame the way that we're going to run the economy. We have got to bring down public spending. We absolutely have to. We're spending way too much. And we need to stop spending so much on debt interest. Quite a lot of our money is just basically going on the interest on that. So savings to go on the deficit, and the rest on growth measures, investments, tax cuts. Stamp duty was the big one, which we talked about. The housing market has completely gummed up. The run-up to the budget did not help. But we want to see business create growth. The bottom line is that we understand that it is not government that creates growth. It is actually business that creates growth. What government needs to do is create the right conditions. We have people running the country who think that they're the ones who are going to fix it all as long as they tinker here and tinker there, give benefits to a certain group. That is completely wrong. So we have laid out some of the things that we will reverse. Andrew and Mel talked about the family farms tax, APR, BPR, all of those things, which we think are not actually going to raise any money. I'm sure Mel can come in with on a little bit more detail, but we want to make sure that we have a plan that's going to work, given that Labour is going to be leaving a huge, huge mess behind. There's only one party that's got a team of people who can fix it.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. So, as I said earlier, £47 billion worth of well-thought-through savings, at least half of that going to paying down the deficit for the reasons that Kemi has just given. We've got to get that deficit down. It's not fair to pass on debt to future generations in that way. It's ruinously expensive. In fact, debt servicing costs, if it was a Whitehall department, would be the third largest department in government. Not spending money on improving public services, but paying off our creditors because of the profligacy of this Chancellor. And putting also money into getting taxes down. So primary residences, getting the property market moving, that has important economic positives. People being able to move to where work is more readily, downsizing, freeing up space in the housing market, and so on. Getting small businesses in high streets out of business rates altogether, 250,000 of them, many of whom, as Andrew has just said, are struggling. And then finally, a big, bold offer to young people taking their first job, whereby instead of paying national insurance, they're actually receiving that money themselves as a down payment on a future property purchase. Those are the right kind of priorities we should have as an economy, not spending more on welfare payments.
Thank you. Harry Farley, BBC.
Thank you, Kemi Badenoch. Harry Farley from BBC. There was a productivity downgrade in the OBR's forecasts, and at least part of that was down to your party's time in office. The OBR talks about the Brexit deal, lack of investment. Do you want to just be honest and take responsibility for your party's part in that downgrade?
So first of all, I'll start by saying that we recognise there was a productivity problem. The private sector did not have the productivity problem that the public sector did. Quite a lot of our time was spent dealing with issues like COVID, where we ended up paying people to stay at home. So we recognise that there were significant issues. But there's nothing in this budget that does anything about productivity. The only time the Chancellor mentioned it was to use it as a stick to beat the last government. It's everybody else's fault except her own. So yes, let's talk about how we can improve productivity. There will be many difficult decisions that would need to be made, and Mel can talk a little bit more about that. So I'm not here to say that everything that happened when we were in government was perfect. It obviously wasn't. But the difference between us and Labour is that we accept that mistakes were made, we show some humility, and we start talking about how we're going to fix it, rather than we're perfect, we've done nothing wrong, look over there. That's the difference between us and Labour. Yeah. Mel?
So in the OBR's report this time around, a startling fact is that they stated effectively there was not one single measure in that budget that increased growth. That's why we've got all these growth downgrades. Not one single measure. When it comes to productivity in the past, productivity is in the hands of this government. One of the first things they did when they came into office was to make big inflationary pay rewards to those in the public sector. The train drivers got 14%, junior doctors got 22%. Not a single string attached to those payments. What they should be doing is demanding productivity and efficiency gains as a consequence. And the final thing I'll say on productivity, the downgrade was an average across the scorecard of going down from 1.3 to 1%. That cost about 16 billion to set against that headroom as an offset. It is quite possible, because the trend productivity rate since 2008 and the global financial crisis has been 0.5%, that there could be a downgrade at some further point down the line, unless this government really grips this. And if that happens, that headroom, even though it's been rebuilt and more, could be at risk. Yeah. So this government is creating risk within the way in which it's managing the economy, even though they're saying we're expanding the headroom. They're not dealing with the underlying structural issues that will get us out of that predicament.
David Shepherd, FT.
Good morning, sorry. Yesterday you suggested Rachel Reeves was lying. today you said she may have given wrong or false information, a subtle difference there in the language. Are you still accusing Rachel Reeves of being a liar today?
Yes. Noah Hoffman from The Sun.
Thank you. Noah Hoffman from The Sun. You've spoken a lot about the need to tackle a very large welfare bill, but missing from that conversation is how much of a big chunk that is taken up by the pension triple lock. That's policy you say you're not going to touch, and yet we see loads of young people leaving the United Kingdom because they feel like economic policies are not built around them and their ambitions. Do you have any more to say on the triple lock? Are you ever going to look at it? That's something Nigel Farage has pledged to do, or is this a given for eternity for the Conservative Party?
So young people are leaving because opportunity is disappearing. I don't think that many of them are going through fiscal policy in detail. They want to get jobs, they can't get jobs. Unemployment has risen every single month since Labour came into office. Graduate recruitment is at record lows since Labour came into office. So our priority right now is jobs and growth. The triple lock is Conservative policy. And yes, it is a huge cost, but right now, making changes to the triple lock does not do anything for growth. What we can do for growth is find people jobs, get them off welfare and into work. That is a huge priority that's going to take a lot of effort. That is where we're putting our focus. You can make changes to the triple lock, we can all get poorer together. You can get people into work, get the economy growing, we all get richer. If the economy was growing at 2-3%, we wouldn't even be having this conversation about the triple lock. So the priority is the wrong place. And good luck to all those people who think that it's reform that's going to sort it out. Every time you ask them a question, they give a different answer about their policies. We are serious people. We are a strong team. We work together, and we're going to find a way to sort this out. Conservative Party policy is that, was or has always been the triple lock. We brought it in. But right now, the real problem is that we have an economy where people are going on welfare to an extent that the rider is getting heavier than the horse. We need to deal with the fact that not enough people are working first, and that is our priority. And the final question from the media is Martin Beckford from the Mail.
Thank you, Martin Beckford from the Daily Mail. You said you want Rachel Reeves to go, but do you not worry that a different Chancellor would be more left-wing than her? And also, everyone will have seen she was trying to avoid your gaze in the start of the BBC programme yesterday. Did you speak to her at all off camera? Thank you.
I did speak to her, I think even on camera. I mean, Rachel Reeves and I probably don't agree on very much, but quite a lot of what you see in Parliament is more theatre than anything else. We're all still people who can have a conversation. But to your first question, sorry, I've actually forgotten what the first question was now.
About her going and somebody worse.
Yes, yes, that's true. Things could always get worse. That is what happens with Labour.
That reminds me of something. Things can only get worse. Sorry.
But what we need them to do is actually open their eyes and listen to business. If I were Keir Starmer, I don't know why I'm giving him this advice. If I were Keir Starmer, I would be asking someone to stand down from their seat and they get a sensible person who everybody in the country can have some faith in and put them in there and make them Chancellor. But they're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to go through lots of different cycles of Labour MPs, some of whom are very similar to the ones that have gone to the Jeremy Corbyn party. We've seen what a rabble they are. Labour are actually not that much different. The hard left on their backbenches is driving the car seat. So it doesn't matter whether it's Rachel Reeves or not. She is clearly not the one in control. A few months ago, she said that two-child benefit cap was not affordable. Suddenly it was. At the same time, she was saying that she had a huge fiscal hole, which the OBR says that was not the case. They are all over the place. And what we really need is a Conservative government with the three of us making sure that we can run the economy in a way that business understands and where we create growth. Not a Labour Party that is just focused on creating welfare. They're no longer the Labour Party. They are the welfare party.
Can I make one? Sorry. One very quick observation, which it really has come to something, ladies and gentlemen. If the justification for keeping somebody is there could actually be somebody who's even worse to take over. I mean, that is now the argument, right? I say no more.
thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've now got just under half an hour for questions from all of you. We're going to start with a question from Jonathan Brenton. Jonathan, could you stand up and you'll be given a mic. Please keep your questions brief and brisk. We want to get as much feedback from the panel as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from Pernod Ricard. We are French investors in the Scotch whisky industry. So I should say, Kemi, thank you for what you did while in government to get the India deal as far as it got. And thank you also, Andrew, for mentioning the hospitality sector, because that has lost north of 85,000 jobs in the last few months with ruinous consequences for young people. I'd like to ask a question about taxation, because excise duty on our products has gone up by 14% since August 23. And yet revenue for government has gone down by 4.8%. Responsible businesses recognise we want to raise money through taxation. It's part of our job. But we'd like to see it done in an effective and fair way. And what we see with the UK taxation system, and I think it applies for other sectors, it's on the wrong side of the Laffer curve. Yeah. You're raising taxes to such an extent you don't raise the revenue. What would a future Conservative government do to get taxes on the right side of the Laffer curve and encourage the UK Treasury to listen to the experience of business?
So I'm very glad that you did mention the Laffer curve. We can see this in a whole bunch of areas. It is not always the case that the more tax you ask for, the more tax you get. We've seen it with VAT on private schools. We'll certainly see it with what they've done on APR and BPR. While Mel is the one who looks after tax policy, Andrew and I had a recent discussion around the Laffer curve and what we could do, because we need to send a signal to business that the best way to get the tax, as much tax as possible, is for business to generate as much in profit as it possibly can. Andrew, did you want to come in on that point?
Well, yes, Kemi. I mean, the key thing is to get the economy growing and making the pie larger. And what that is, and you mentioned a couple of those factors, is getting back to an environment where it's easier to hire, it's easier to grow. We haven't talked about energy, but the energy in this country is affordable. And then making sure that we understand the tax consequences. It's not even our goal to have as much tax as possible. We want an economy that's as big as possible, that employs as many people productively as possible, and that all of you in business do that number one thing that you wake up to do every single morning, which is happy customers, whether they're exports, whether they're domestic customers. We want to create an environment in which you can succeed to the best of your ability.
Yeah, I would add that. I'd agree with all of that entirely. In fact, I flew out to Nashville to spend a day with Arthur Laffer a month or so back, and he's absolutely right about so many taxes having reached a point now where actually the yield from those taxes is not going up with the additional rates. Now, Andrew mentioned energy, and I see we've got Andrew Bowie here, our very fine Shadow Scottish Secretary. I was up in Aberdeen recently. The level of taxation on oil, gas and gas extraction out there, which is in the mid-70% now with the energy profits levy, simply means that the whole sector is going to close down. 200,000 jobs. And I won't dwell too much on that, but the absurdity of Norway actually extracting gas from the same basin that we're shutting down our activity on, and so on, and so forth. So the answer to your question is we have to look at every single tax and really look into where it is on the Laffer curve, focus particularly on those taxes that drive wealth creation and employment and growth, and look to getting those down, and recognise that, as Kemi said earlier when she talked about people leaving the country now, which isn't just the super rich, it is young people that just happen to be mobile and talented, right? What the costs of a high tax environment are in that sense. We've lost 16,000 high net worth people during the time that this government has been in office. The estimate of the tax take that walked out the door when that 16,000 went is probably equivalent to between 1/3 and 500,000 people on average earnings, okay? So we have got to, in this increasingly mobile world where people can reallocate to lower tax jurisdictions, we've got to start getting taxes down on productive activity.
Very good. Next question is from Mike Archer. Thank you, Mike. Tell us who you are, Mike.
Yeah, good morning, Mike Archer. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs for AstraZeneca. So my question is a bit of a take on that on fiscal incentives. So as you know, business confidence is down, FDI is down, and part of the reason for that is some of the gaps in the UK's fiscal incentive regime. For example, in R&D tax credits, we don't currently include capital spend on plant and machinery within qualifying expenditure, unlike our peers in, say, France or Ireland. Now, could the Conservatives commit to reviewing all of the UK's fiscal incentives for business investment and identify those gaps and commit to delivering on those in the next manifesto?
I think that is something that I can say. And just to be clear, what we want to do in time for the next election is something really big and really bold. We have been tweaking a system for about 30, 40 years now that is no longer really fit for purpose. Every budget, every election, it's a few tweaks here, a few tweaks there, minor adjustments. We need to do something really bold, really radical, but we need to be aware of what the likely consequences will be and how we deal with the outcome. That's why we're not rushing out saying we're going to change all this and change all that. At the 2019 election, none of us could have predicted what the next few years would have looked like. No one would have predicted a global pandemic. We need to make sure that we are resilient enough to handle those sorts of black swan events and shocks while still having a radical agenda that sets, that lets business know the direction of travel. What we saw with Labour was them coming in and telling everyone how terrible it was. They had a small window to boost optimism, to boost confidence, and instead they used that window to talk the economy down because they thought it would be a good way to have a pop at us. Oh, look at the big mess the Conservatives made. All sorts of bad things are going to happen now. Everybody heard that, and then they took decisions that have meant fewer jobs and an economy that is not growing. We need to make sure that we send a strong signal that lets business see that we are open for business, that we believe in you, that we support you, that we listen to you, not just lots of pointless roundtables where you tell us all the things that are going wrong and then nothing changes. I think people are sick of that. You're speaking as someone from the pharmaceutical industry. There are a lot of things that are putting pressure on that industry, how we work within a different market, what's happening with intellectual property. I've been at World Trade Organization meetings where people are trying to eat our lunch. I don't think that enough time is really spent thinking about how we can make sure we keep one of the strongest industries that the UK has had. How do we deal with leaving the European Union and the impact on pharma? I don't think a lot of effort has been put into that. I'm not saying we go back into the EU, but what is a game-changing agenda? That's what I want all of you to see. That's what we're going to be doing. Bold, radical, game-changing, but sensible as well. Thinking about likely consequences and outcomes so that you can be reassured that competent people who know what they're doing are looking after our economy. Thank you.
And if I may add, we will have a plan. I mean, I don't think anyone in Westminster wakes up in the morning trying to do harm, but it is criminal that this government didn't have a plan for the life sciences for 15 months. Yeah. Right? This is one of, and you're all wonderful, but this is one of our most successful industries. You cannot have a growth strategy for the UK economy if that doesn't include the professional and financial services, the life sciences, hospitality. These are some of the absolute bellwethers of our economy. Anyone trying to set out a plan to grow needs to have made clear strategy decisions in advance. And yet, in many cases, we're still waiting to understand what the government is doing. We will have a plan. We will have that in advance, and we will hit the ground running rather than have drift and dither and only ever react after events have happened.
Let's hear from James Watson. James, could you stand up, please? Thank you. The mic will be brought to you.
I'm James Watson, Traditional Products. We manufacture 97% of our stair
Hold the mic a bit nearer your mouth, if you may, James.
We manufacture 97% of our stair parts in the UK. The budget appears to focus more on redistributing wealth rather than creating genuine added value. Added value is the spark that produces a fair and just economy. With the service industry now representing around 81% of GDP, a notable increase from 67% from 1997. I am particularly concerned that manufacturing, construction, farming account for less than 20% of GDP. Unless we are exporting services abroad, we are primarily redistributing wealth rather than generating true added value. How did the panel assess the implications of this shift for the overall health of the UK economy? What strategies do you propose to enhance the economy beyond mere redistribution and foster a more dynamic and resilient economic landscape?
James, thank you for that. I am worried about manufacturing. I'm worried about it not necessarily because of the ratio, but because of resilience. I think we are just forgetting how to do so many things. A lot of our institutional memory is disappearing. China is eating everybody's lunch, not just ours, Germany, Australia. You know, a lot of the countries in the Far East are concerned about its capacity. And we need to get very serious about making sure we continue to be a great manufacturing country. And the biggest thing I think we can do is focus on energy. Energy is growth. Countries that have terrible energy policies don't grow. Countries that have great energy policies do grow. And we have not had a good energy policy for many, many years now. It is too expensive for you to manufacture. We are deindustrializing. And that's something that we're paying a lot of attention to. Claire Coutinho, Shadow Energy Secretary, and Andrew Bowie have been talking about our cheap power plan, how we can make life cheaper, not just for households, but also for manufacturing. So that is the offer that we have. We've got to focus on that. We need to also look at what skills we are creating in the country. I think that not everybody is meant to be in a service economy. So having an imbalance means that we're not getting the very best out of a lot of talent in the UK. This goes back to having a clear strategy. Who is it that we need to develop? How do we do so? Looking at talent. All of these things need to be thought about in the round. And when I look at what is happening to the car manufacturing industry in particular, the endless uncertainty on the regulatory side, where decisions are made and then changed all because of politics. I think certainty is something the business needs. Uncertainty kills business just as much as bad policy. People don't invest, they don't make decisions, they can't see into the future. What we want to give you is certainty, regulatory certainty, as well as political stability. We want to make sure that people have the freedom to take the risks, knowing that everything is going to be stable. I think that's the best thing that we can do for manufacturing after looking at energy costs.
Mel, do you want to come in briefly?
Yeah, very quickly. I think that's a great question because I think it actually leads us into what kind of economy overall that we're trying to create, okay? So we've talked a lot about tax, but there are some deep and some would say near intractable challenges, structural issues that our economy has that we will have to address. Now, we've talked about tax. We've talked about LAFA. We've talked about getting tax rates down. We talked about getting taxes down, particularly in areas that lean into growth and wealth creation and so on. We've talked about the size of the state, and we've made a down payment of £47 billion worth of savings. We've shown how that can translate into those lower taxes. Kemi has touched on skills. I think there are big questions about higher education and universities. We have far too many young people going through those institutions and not getting sufficient value added to justify the cost of them or the state. And we announced at our conference that we would double the amount that we would spend on apprenticeships as an approach to skills. Now, in a world in which net migration is going to be coming down, there will be hotspots in the labour market which wouldn't otherwise have been there. We've got AI, which is going to, in a fundamental way, and as yet unknown way, churn up the demand for skills. So we're going to have a nimble, lifelong apprenticeship kind of offer. And a lot of supply side things. Energy costs, certainly. We're paying 5 times what the Americans and Canadians are, probably 7 times what the Chinese are for electricity, 50% more than France and Germany. And that leads us into big questions about the environment, green issues, and the balances there, along with the future of nuclear, small modular reactors, oil and gas, the kind of issues that I know Andrew is very vexed about, and rightly so, up in the North Sea, to get those costs down, particularly as things like AI become so important. You know, 20% of the electricity output of the Republic of Ireland solely goes into data centres. That's the level of demand. And the final thing I would say is supply side. We have got to get better at building things on budget and on time. The infrastructure, roads, rail, houses. Why is it that we end up with a £125 million back tunnel for HS2, right? Whereas the Chinese are building Beijing to Shanghai superfast rail in just 3 years. We have got to radically overhaul planning and get those infrastructure things really moving. So a big task that is going to take months and years to come up with all of the answers to those big questions, but we've got the right team to do that.
Energy, a massive subject. We're in the last 15 minutes. Very briefly, Andrew.
People often don't know all of the policies we've already announced. So, James, first of all, thank you for what you do, being a brilliant manufacturer. We will put businessmen and women in our embassies as ambassadors. There's no reason why we wouldn't do that. Many of those relationships are primarily economic, and we need a culture change in terms of promoting exports. We have promised to scrap the green tape on businesses, all of that environmental reporting you're mandated to do. If you wish to do that, that's fine, but we will not mandate businesses to do that. We will scrap that employment rights bill if it makes to the statute book. It's 329 pages. And we need, as a society, to go back and look at the honours system so that we recognise wealth creators, people who are putting back in their community, not merely the lanyard classes who are sitting there flying a desk in Whitehall.
Okay, we are now into the last 15 minutes, as I say. We're going to take questions 2 at a time. Very brisk questions, please. No speeches. Sorry to push you around. Stephen Massey takes the mic. Introduce yourself, Stephen. And can we please get a mic also to Adam Durant? Stephen? Which one's Stephen? Yeah. Stephen there. And then a mic for... Then maybe you could pass the mic to Adam. Briefly, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A question about the link between the extraordinary rise in benefits and, as the leader said, people, having the option of not working. How does this feed into immigration? And in particular, the two-child benefit cap abolition, what is that going to mean for both immigration and illegal immigration?
And to Adam, please. Thank you. Do you want to stand up, Adam? Thank you. Tell us who you are.
Hello, my name's Adam Durant. I'm an entrepreneur. I built and scaled a UK climate tech software company over the past decade, created jobs and training for scores of people, and successfully sold the business last year. Labour's budget has triggered a historic exodus of Britain's wealth creators. So as we heard from Mel, 16,000 high net worths are leaving Britain this year, overtaking China for the first time. Business asset disposal release has jumped from 10% to 18%, so that's an 80% tax rate increase. Investor relief limits were slashed 90%. Angel investors face an almost 130% effective tax increase, and employee ownership trust release was cut in half. So these wealth creators are moving to
Can I have a question, please? Sorry to push you.
Sure.
A lot of people want to get in.
Does the Conservative leadership agree with the need to restore Britain's competitive position to boost entrepreneurship and growth, specifically by honouring the manifesto commitment not to increase capital gains tax?
Thank you both, gentlemen. Sorry to push.
So I'll try and be as quick as possible. Stephen asked about the rise in benefits and the link to migration. Our aim is to create an economy that does not require migration to grow. A lot of our GDP growth was actually based on having more people come into the country. And after a tipping point, many of those people were not earning that much and were bringing in loads of dependents who then needed benefits. So our policy is to make sure that we restrict benefits to UK nationals only. We've got a treaty with the EU. Those who have settled status are in a different category because we have reciprocal rights. But the bottom line is no benefits for foreign nationals. It is acting as a pull factor for a lot of people coming to this country, whether through the asylum route or elsewhere, and it is costing us billions of pounds. We do need to tackle that. So that is a simple policy that we have. We want an economy that is not reliant on immigration to grow. I think Mel can probably answer on the CGT question, but Adam, your basic question is right. We do need to be a lot more competitive. The whole point of leaving the European Union was so we could compete with the EU countries better, not so we could regulate more than them. And instead, we ended up delivering what was a more left-wing version of what the EU was offering. That is one of the reasons why we haven't been able to make as many productivity gains as possible. And as I've said, we want to do something really bold around tax, just looking at everything. What does a new world look like? I'm not going to announce new tax policy at the moment beyond what we've said, but certainly the spirit of what you're asking for, we certainly agree with.
Yeah,
very briefly.
Spirit of what you're asking for, absolutely right. I would add to your tale of woe of people leaving the country, offshoring of jobs actually is the other way that we're witnessing the effects of this particular tax policy. Can't comment specifically on CGT just yet, but hear what you're saying, and it's an important point. Just, I would add to Kemi's point on immigration. The CSJ, Centre for Social Justice, has recently issued a report in which if you have 3 children and various elements of your family qualify for various different benefits, you can end up having to earn £71,000 a year in order to be getting the same net take-home pay as a family in those circumstances. This is bad messaging when it comes to illegal migration.
Yeah.
Because the message is you can come here, large family, and you'll be looked after.
A mic, please, to Susan Rose and also to John Pocock, please. Susan, could you stand up, please? Thank you. And then followed by John Pocock. Please stand up.
My name's Susan Rose. I'm the founder and creator of Susan Rose China in Stoke-on-Trent. We have a British manufacturing business in Stoke making British bone china. Now, we are always competing against cheap imports from China, which is hugely challenging for us. And how do we make people believe in the importance of buying British, supporting British manufacturing, and therefore encouraging young people to come in as apprentices? It is so difficult.
Thank you, Susan. John Pocock, tell us who you are, please, and briefly your question.
Hello, John Pocock. I was fortunate enough to build a FTSE 250 from scratch, so I know a little bit about growth. I've recruited about 1,000 people in their 20s. I would like us to consider raising the employer's national insurance level from 21 to 24 years old, so that we get a lot more people into work coming out of university in particular. The energy which young people in their 20s can give to a company is tremendous. I've done the mathematics. It looks doable. It will make a profit at the end of the next parliament.
Two fabulous questions.
Thank you. I was actually worried that John was going to ask that we raise employers' NI, to which my answer would have been a hard no.
He was toying with you. He was toying with you to get your attention.
He was. But John, I completely agree with you. We need to make it easier to hire young people. You know, if they don't get that first job, then it has a massive impact on the rest of their lives. Making it easier to hire young people means making it cheaper to hire young people because they don't have that experience. And you look at the combination of what happened in the 2024 budget, raising the minimum wage, increasing employers' NI, raising the thresholds to a different amount, just made it a triple whammy of toxicity for young people. I think it is an interesting idea. We do have our own policy, which is the first jobs bonus, which is a bit similar, but it's certainly something that I think that we can look at. Susan, you asked about cheap imports. You are right. We are competing against a country that is taking manufacturing to the next level. How do we encourage people to buy British? First of all, let's create a level playing field. It is not a level playing field at the moment. You know, you're in Stoke-on-Trent. I know how many businesses have been closing because the energy costs are just too high for them to do anything on ceramics in China. So first of all, thank you for staying in business. I cannot imagine how hard it has been. But I think we also need to talk a little bit about how China makes its products. This is a country, the UK is a country, where people want to know where things come from and how it has been made. The Chinese use slave labor. We know this. A lot of what we talked about in government with the Uyghurs, we tried to put some of this in legislation. We need to make sure that the products that are coming to our country are being made at a level playing field at what we manufacture here. We believe in competition, of course, because competition helps businesses. If we stop competition, we will stop being productive. We will get poorer, but that competition has to be fair. And I think showing where there are unfair practices and people trying to cheat the system means that we will get more people thinking about where their goods come from and will buy British.
Okay, we are in the last 5 minutes. You're all busy people. You want to get on with your day, I'm sure. I'm going to take 3 more questions, very, very brisk and brief. Could we please have a mic going to Ken Costa? Ken, stand up and tell us who you are, and we'll give you a mic. And then the mic is to Mark Constable. Mark, could you stand up, please, so we can give you a mic? And then finally, Seth Finnegan as well. Let's keep this brief and brisk. So off you go, Ken.
Ken Costa, I'm an investment banker. We've seen the decline in the City of London, the stock market, the loss of confidence here, fewer people wanting to list, fewer capital raisings happening. How do we restore the City of London to its preeminent financial position in the world.
Thank you, Ken. Hold that thought. Then we come to Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Constable. I am Head of Public Affairs for Trojan Energy, an Aberdeen-based electric vehicle infrastructure manufacturer, and I'm also the elected chair of the largest electric vehicle trade association in the UK, Recharge UK. My question is, given that this government have been just largely following the previous government's policy in terms of the electric vehicle transition, and making lots and lots of mixed messages that we saw in the budget last week, and that certainty is absolutely vital in our industry, what intervention would a future Conservative government make?
Thank you very much. And finally, Seth.
Good morning. I'm the UK Chief Executive of Informed Solutions. We are a UK privately owned tech scale-up specialising in data and AI. For us, the autumn budget introduced some positive measures for tech, specifically around expanded investment incentives and AI growth zones, but also clearly tax changes that could impact staff, founders, and investors. So how would a future Conservative government ensure that tech UK scale-ups are incentivised to grow whilst also balancing the books?
Thank you all, and thank you for being brief, panel.
Thank you. I will leave the question on listings and tech scale-ups to Mel and to Andrew, because I think they can give a lot more detail. I will focus on Mark's question about just certainty when it comes to energy policy. You are right. Quite a lot of what the government is doing now is slightly based on what we did in government. There has been too much uncertainty. But we were making changes, and I say this as someone who was business secretary, because industry was telling us that the policy was not working. This is one of the reasons why I've said the legislation for net zero by 2050 is unworkable. We need better incentives, and we need a plan that is not going to bankrupt our country. Right now, what we're seeing is car manufacturing leaving the UK, and a mixed message being sent with the road pricing paper mile for electric vehicles, when a whole bunch of people were asked to buy those vehicles in order to encourage the take-up. Now, I'm somebody who thinks that this government should not intervene in the market this much. Electric vehicles are mostly made by China. It has not been that great for our own industry, and I pay tribute to what you're doing, Mark. I don't think that it is very easy. What we need to do is to get government to stop sending confusing messages. We put some investments around gigafactories. I think that was a good thing, but we have to be realistic about what we can actually do in the UK and not turn our country just into a market that buys from China when it cannot manufacture on its own. And that's why we oppose quite a lot of what the government is doing. It's not helping UK manufacturing. It's too expensive for UK consumers. It's not really working for our businesses, and it's making China wealthier at a time when they're becoming more and more of an economic threat.
Your final thoughts, Mel, before we
very
finish with
quickly.
Andrew?
So on Ken's point about the city, I think firstly the listings regime and how onerous that is. Secondly, on tax and stamp duty in particular on share transactions. There's a third point, I think, about the depth of the capital pools that there are in our country, particularly long-term patient capital. And I think there the pension sector is a very important component part. And we've seen some of the reforms that when we were in government, kicked off around the Mansion House Compact, and where that money goes as between foreign investment and domestic investment. We're not up for any form of mandation, because these pensions quite rightly have a fiduciary duty to get the best return for their investors. But nonetheless, I do think we need to ask questions around the way the tax reliefs work, given that that is a contribution to the UK taxpayer, and that in relation to where those investments are going. And the final thing I would say is I'll leave Andrew to speak a little bit more about scale-ups. But of course, we've been great with our universities, etc., spinning these businesses out. It is that next stage that we get to. There's an important prize if we can get this right, in that if you look at the different valuations on stock markets around the world, a lot of it is driven in the US by having these high-tech, big growth, high PE businesses there, and we need to have more of them for the overall health of our financial ecosystem.
And finally, Andrew Griffith.
Wow, right. Okay, look, we need, for all, the uniting theme around a lot of this is we also need a vision. We need to give people confidence. We need to be proud of this country. We can, once again, be one of the best countries in the world. At the moment, we're falling down the prosperity league tables. We're approaching 30. I don't want that for my children. None of us here want that for our children or our grandchildren. We ought to be going out and giving business, because it is business that creates jobs, business that's going to create the prosperity, business that will provide the tax receipts for all of the things that we want. We ought to, as an economy, acknowledge that the pace car, the competitive set, is not the G7. If you X out the United States, the G7 is the other group of slowly growing economies. We want to compete with the best and brightest in the world, the G20, some of the fast-growing economies, which is where we are losing our young people to and our wealth creators. Ken, we need to fall back in love with risk. Post-2008, the entire city establishment sought their role to extinguish risk. And if you extinguish risk, you will not have any growth. And then finally, we as a country, and this is where my party meandered with its core principles, to put it mildly, we need to once again get back to being on the side of wealth creators, unequivocally, in everything we do, in our policies around red tape, around regulation, in what Mel is doing on tax. We need to understand that you build an economy on the back of wealth, not welfare.
Exactly.
Andrew Griffith, thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, that does bring proceedings to a close. I'm Liam Halligan. You can read my work in the Sunday Telegraph. You can listen to the Planet Normal podcast, where I sometimes get to talk alongside Alison Pearson, the wonderful Alison Pearson, and you can read me on my When the Facts Change Substack. And I've just started a new economics show, weekly show on my Substack. So there you go. Thank you to the ICAEW for hosting us so beautifully. Thank you to the Conservative Party for asking me to host this event. Thanks to all of you for your excellent questions. Sorry if I was forcing you to be too brisk. Please put your hands together, ladies and gentlemen, for our panel: Andrew Griffith, Shadow Business Secretary, Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, and of course, Kemi Badenoch, Leader of the Opposition. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Very good. Well done.
of a stereotyping of black people in expensive cars. Can I ask you, was that sort of stereotyping also prevalent within police ranks?
Absolutely.
Together with other stereotypes and tropes of black people?
Definitely, but emphasising, obviously, we're talking about 1986 to 1990 when I was a uniform officer.
And Asian people?
Not for us so much there in Bromley at the time.
Was there a view that a black person was more likely to be involved in crime?
Definitely. Emphasis a young black person, particular of the age group. You had elderly black couple going to Bromley shopping. No, but if you did have some youth come down, then yes, that would be regarded as they're almost in Bromley for up to no good type thing.
Was there a distinction between males and females?
More to male.
And were there any stereotypes about the levels of intelligence within the black population?
Unfortunately, yes.
And what was the perception?
Very negative. Very negative. Maybe it was very negative, but to a certain degree, maybe it was correct. Their career trajectory was not expected to be high. And so I think that's most unfortunate. They felt that, and I think it was actually very difficult for the career trajectory to be a lot higher than.
Could you speak up, please? Were there any stereotypes about the propensity of black people to violence?
There was always a fear. There was always a fear. If you had a group of black, particularly young people together, that they congregated in a larger group, they'd be concerned that it's almost inevitable that it might be problematic.
I've been asking you about your experiences in uniform in frontline policing. Can I now move to your time in special branch before the SDS? Were the attitudes the same there, or were they different?
I don't think the officers themselves, I think there were definitely less racist, that was there. But what there was is we had so very little dealing with black people in the special branch. The special branch, the areas that we were concerned in, for example, like protection, or were concerned in all the areas. The Irish terrorism was a vastly bigger area. We had very, very little dealing with black people in the special branch.
In general terms, within the SDS, was the position the same or different?
The position was exactly the same. We had, other than the officers, which actually was me and Trevor Morris, who obviously he was black, as everybody is aware here. There was very little dealing of other activists, groups that involved black people. So if in the event there was, maybe there would have been more racist comments, racist banter, and things like this. Whereas it was me and there was Trevor dealing with the black justice campaigns, and but Trevor himself, I've heard his evidence here, and there's no reason to disbelieve how he felt, but I certainly felt that the jokes he was getting, I had jokes directed at me for my various reasons, but certainly Trevor had some jokes directed at him that were because he was black, because that was considered, I was different in other areas, and that was his difference. But the other thing with Trevor, I don't know how clear it was, but he was a person who's very, very capable of looking after himself, and some sort of kung fu master at the time. So once again, you can't bully, you can't do too much against somebody who would deal with you.
Going to come to specific individuals in a moment, but as a matter of generality, are you able to help us with whether the sort of stereotypical attitudes towards black people that you have described in uniform were held by at least some within the SDS?
Yes.
And can you give us an idea of how widespread those stereotypical attitudes were?
The worst examples, the two managers that no doubt we're going to get onto, but the other ones, I don't know, just general banter. So there'd be laughs, there'd be jokes, but I'm saying you'd have the same jokes levelled at people who were, say, I don't know, some from Welsh, or they were overweight, or they were women. There was nobody that the SDS's humour is a better word, could not reach. And this is the day before they invented diversity, inclusivity, and equality. It was before body positivity was there. Christ, everybody was up for it.
And I'm understanding your evidence to be that that would include jokes about black people.
Correct, yeah.
Asian people?
Correct.
Were you aware that there was a particularly high incidence of racial violence, and in particular attacks by white people on black and Asian people in southeast London in the early 90s?
I was generally aware of what was happening, but I was specifically aware, and very, very aware, when I was on the SDS in the undercover role that I undertook. And I found, sure we're going to get onto it, but I found the levels of violence astonishing, absolutely astonishing, and a totally eye-opener from my perspective. And that's literally as soon as I arrived at my beginning my posting at the Kingsway College.
I'm interested in just a little bit earlier than that. Were you aware, you were obviously, as we're going to come to, aware of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Were you aware of the murder of Roland Adams when you were in the back office?
Yes, yes.
And Rohit Dugal?
Correct.
And was the unit aware that there was a high incident of racial violence in southeast London in the early 90s?
Yes, but it's also overspilled earlier because
was that the principal means of dealing with that should be by measures that could be accessible to all, or as many as possible, so pan across the economy.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. And then you also speak in your statement about establishing the COVID-19 hub. And just so we understand, that is internal to your department, is that right?
Yes, all of this is the sort of wiring of my department.
Yeah. And you describe that as having what you've called a cross-cutting function, coordination function. Can you just expand a little bit and put that into simple language in terms of what it was actually doing?
Yes, sorry, it's a slightly jargon term.
Don't worry.
What I mean by that is that it was engaging across different parts of the department, and indeed would also work with other relevant government departments as appropriate. So it would pull together all the relevant information and analysis. I think it's also just important, if I may add, in terms of my position as Secretary of State, I would tend to commission advice, or advice would be given to me. The key thing for me was the advice as requested through my permanent secretary and indeed my private office. So there wasn't a huge amount of distinction as to which different bit of the department it came from. The question I was always asking myself was, is this giving me the information that I require in order to discharge my duties as Secretary of State?
I see. So there is a final filter, doesn't really matter where it's originating from, of the information that then comes to you for decision-making and direction of policy. Is that?
Yes. So everything that I received as a minister in a written format would come to my private office. My private office would then take that advice, and they would provide a cover note which would summarise the nature of the decisions I had to take and so on. Also, additional advice would be provided both from the private office in terms of their perspective on what the key issues were, and almost always, except in a few national security related issues, it would have advice from political advisors as well on it. Okay. Then the other forms of advice I would receive would generally be orally in meetings or telephone calls, but again the private office would engage with different parts of the department to determine who was the most appropriate person to attend that meeting or to provide advice over the telephone. Okay.
So we've dealt with the strategy, policy and fiscal events team, pre-existing, had established lines of communication with the Treasury, and so a good starting point. You established the COVID-19 hub, but is it right you also established the Economic Response Directorate, known as the ERD?
Yes.
And that was established on the 23rd of March. And did that have, as its name perhaps suggests, an economically focused responsibility?
Yes, that's correct, and became one of the principal way in which we dealt with the Treasury.
Okay.
In respect of COVID-related interventions.
Yeah. But just looking at those different bodies, how were they working together? We've got there 3 teams: strategy, policy and fiscal events, COVID-19 hub, Economic Response Directorate, pre-existing 4th Office for Civil Society. How was that all working together? It may sound that's 4 things doing 4 different bodies doing similar things. How did you see it?
Well, as I say, the first way in which I saw it was, am I getting the right information? So as I think I set out in my witness statement, and I believe that Sam Lister sets out in his witness statement as well, the principal responsibility for the organisation of the department and the delivery of what we're seeking to achieve lay through the permanent secretary, and so I would rely on the permanent secretary's advice in respect of that. The second thing is that I would engage in a number of different ways. First of all, I've set out how I engage with the private office. So everything went through the filter of the private office, so they coordinated with the appropriate bits of the department that I needed advice from. I also met on at least a weekly basis with both the permanent secretary and with the relevant director generals. And in particular, Sam Lister, as the Director General, sort of oversaw all these different cross-cutting elements. So I was confident that it went up a a Whitehall hierarchy that went through Sam Lister as the DG to the Permanent Secretary. I met with both of those people, and then there was the filter of the private office.
I suppose the important thing for you as the ultimate decision maker, did you ever feel that you were getting conflicting advice from different teams, or that they weren't working well together, or rather did you feel that each was complementing the other, doing slightly different things, but ultimately leading to coherent advice to you? How did it appear at the time?
And I think that's a very important question, and I'm sure I never felt there was conflicting advice. One shouldn't view these as being sort of different fiefdoms or baronetcies. They were all playing their role. And I think it's worth also just appreciating that this was a function of the department pivoting to this COVID crisis situation, where suddenly as a department we were dealing with all these different bits that the department was responsible for. So the DCMS, and even more so at the time I was Secretary of State, had a very wide range of responsibilities, going through telecommunications to the newspaper industry, sports, civil society, arts, culture, and so on. And we were trying to coordinate our response to all those different sectors, all of whom had significant needs.
I mean, your experience of government, is that array of sectors for which you were responsible, is that unusual for a department to have that sort of breadth of different sectors, ranging from, say, the charity sector all the way through to telecommunications and media?
Yes, it is. I mean, I think the other department that used to be much more like that was the Home Office. And if one wants to get into the sort of history of all of this, I believe that the department was hived off of the Home Office at one point because the Home Office had such a wide variety of different responsibilities. And just fast-forwarding slightly to the department acquired responsibility for digital, I believe, of business before I became Secretary of State, and civil society has sat in other parts of government, including in the Cabinet Office.
So what I'm really trying to understand is whether it was the breadth of the sectors that your department was responsible for that necessitated different bodies within the department feeding in advice on different issues.
I think it was more, in terms of the creation of these different units, and particularly the COVID hub, this was more a reflection of the department stepping up to a new role, which was about how can we support these different sectors in two respects. One, the impact of them from being locked down, or many of them from being locked down, and then so what the rules meant and so on and so forth. And then secondly, the support that they would then need from the government, principally financial support.
When it came to financial support, or when it comes to it, we're going to go on, and I'm going to ask you some questions about sector-specific support that was introduced. But was your focus on that, identifying what sector-specific support the department could offer, funded by the Treasury if necessary, or was it on ensuring that the panic economic measures that the Treasury was introducing worked for your sectors, or both? I'd just be interested if you could help us with your strategy for that.
Yes, both, and sequentially. So to begin with, it was to understand what the non-medical interventions that they use. I forget the terminology.
NPIs.
Exactly.
Yes.
The non-pharmaceutical interventions. Yes. What the non-pharmaceutical interventions meant for our sectors. And there was a lot of engagement with the sectors in respect of that. Then, as it became apparent that lots of the non-pharmaceutical interventions would have potentially an existential threat, present an existential threat to those sectors, it was understanding what that actually meant and the scale of the support they needed. Then it became apparent from our engagement, particularly with the Treasury and the discussions that we were having, including collectively as ministers in the government, that the first line and the principal means of response was these pan-economic measures. So at that stage, it was making sure that that those applied to as many of our sectors as possible. That certainly wasn't a given at the beginning, so we wanted to make sure that was the case. Once we then understood where it applied and where the gaps might emerge, we then started to engage more in terms of what sector-specific interventions might be required, hence the charity support package of £750 million, the Cultural Recovery Fund, and all the other sector-specific packages that we engaged with.
Okay. So in terms of those significant pan-economic measures, we're talking, are we, about things like the job retention scheme, self-employed income support scheme, loan schemes, grants, and business rate relief, those sorts of schemes that are applying across the economy.
PAY deferral is another one, yeah.
Yeah. So first focus is see what the Treasury is delivering and see how that might apply to our sector and how we can try and ensure that it does apply to our sector, and then look for gaps that are emerging or areas that might need additional support and see whether we can land schemes that are specific to our sector or sectors.
Yes, that is correct, yes.
Okay. Now, can we look first of all at some of that sector support, and in particular support for the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. And I'm just going to ask, please, if we could have up on the screen INQ 000623 and it's page 1. There we are. Thank you. Yes. I think this is from the 18th of March of 2020. So this is a submission to you as Secretary of State. And if we could just focus on the recommendation. This was a recommendation on the 18th of March that essentially you should request of the Treasury £2 billion of funding to deliver a proposed package of support, which was a £1 billion UK Community Mobilisation Fund to ensure mission-critical parts of the voluntary sector are able to respond to this emergency, and 2, a £1 billion stabilisation fund to prevent large-scale closures of charities that provide direct support for the most vulnerable people in our communities, such as hospices. So just so we understand this is coming to you from the Office for Civil Society, is that right?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Yeah. And it's essentially a suggestion that you should be going to the Treasury at that stage and saying, can we have £2 billion of funding split in that way to be delivered by the department? So this is funding, just so we're clear, is it that was being suggested you should ask for in addition to all the pan-economic measures that you've touched on?
No, I don't believe it was. And I think if you look at the sequencing of it, that's dated the 18th. I don't think the pan-economy measures were announced, I think, maybe till the 25th. From recollection. So this was prior to the pan-economy measures.
I see. So this was a sort of early pitch as to what you should be going to ask for.
So it's worth bearing in mind, because things moved so quickly during the COVID crisis. We were simultaneously engaging with the Treasury about the pan-economy measures, not knowing exactly what the pan-economy measures looked like, but also the Office for Civil Society was engaging with the charitable sector and others. And this is them coming to me and saying, through my private office and so on, this is what we would recommend as a package of direct support in the way described in Para 3A.
Okay, so this is Office for Civil Society engaging with the charity sector. This is the if you like, the early bid of what they are telling them they think they're going to need, and coming to you and asking for you to make that case to the Treasury. What was your reaction to that, your response to that request at that early stage?
Well, the first thing I should say is that unfortunately we haven't been able to get through the department the cover note. So typically this would come with a cover note with the advice from my private secretary, advice from my special advisor, and then I would write on that cover note my response to that. We have been unable to, Scotland's been unable to track that down. However, my recollection is that I came back and asked for, and I would say it will almost always be the case if I was given a submission like this, asking for £2 billion of taxpayers' money to be spent. I'm pretty sure I went back and asked some further questions about exactly how we derived these numbers, who it was seeking to benefit, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly say, I think it's paragraph 84 of your statement, that you had concerns on that submission. And were those essentially the concerns, that this was a lot of money to be asking for at that stage?
Yes, I mean, it was a lot of money to be asking for, full stop, and certainly as the Secretary of State, I would not want to sign off on such a large request, even though it was essentially first stage going to the Treasury, until I had full confidence in it. So I believe, and as I set out in my statement, as you say, I asked questions of this because it was a significant amount of money, and to get further detail.
I mean, at any time, what sort of things are you balancing as Secretary of State when requests for funding, particularly in that sort of level, are being made to you?
So I'm considering the needs of the sector. I'm considering whether it represents value for money. I'm considering how we would distribute this. I'm considering, is there deadweight cost? That is to say that there's some other scheme that is already providing it, so we could be replicating that. I'm also all the time thinking of my constituents and the people that elected all of us, who will end up, it'll be their taxes that pay for it. Is this getting the balance right? Is it A, effective, and is it B, proportionate to the need?
Presumably, if you don't ask questions like that as Secretary of State, you're going to lose credibility with HMT for any other funding requests.
Yes, both with HMT and indeed with Parliament, to whom I'd have to justify almost all of these things. So you end up being called before a select committee and so on. So I had to be very confident that this was the right amount of money that I was requesting.
Was there, from your perspective, additional concern that this was a bid for a very large sum of money, even before you knew what the Treasury was going to actually announce in terms of support and how that support would be delivered?
Yes, of course. I mean, as I said, there was a sort of, and it's a little difficult to recall exactly the sequencing in my thoughts at the time, but I'm aware that we were in parallel engaging with the pan-economy measures. So clearly, it would have, and I think this is what transpires in the subsequent piece of evidence that I have submitted and the inquiry has, that we then took into account the effect of the pan-economy measures in refining this number.
Yeah. Well, I think it was on the 25th of March 2020. It's INQ 00006235559, please. And page 1. If we look at number 4 there, in light of the Treasury's comments, the economic support package and other government announcements, we recommend seeking funding for a smaller package now, to which we could add later if needed. There's a balance between going to HMT with a number that we think they will agree and pushing for a larger number that the sector wants. We recommend an initial package on this scale is deliverable, and then it sets out a small allocation to a National Emergencies Trust of 10 million and a larger boost of 500 million new money to the National Lottery Community Fund. So that's a week on from the previous document we looked at, but in that intervening week, you know more about what the Treasury is doing. Is that fair?
Yes, that is correct, yes.
Yeah. And so that became the advice. And how did you react to that advice?
I seem to recall, and again, I do have to say the caveat that I would have liked to be able to have seen the actual physical box notes, that it was sort of hoving into broadly the right sort of amount given the pan economy measures. The other thing that I recall at the time was that the decision was taken by the Treasury, but collectively agreed across government that we'd have these pan economy measures. So therefore, the focus of this became more, okay, so the bits of the charitable sector that are going to carry on delivering in response to COVID, how do we support them in doing that?
So was that part of the equation that you were in particular looking at supporting those parts of the sector, or prioritising rather than looking to support, prioritising those parts of the charitable sector that were going to be playing that part in the response to COVID?
Yes, and indeed, if one looks at the overall package and the breakdown of that as it transpired, a lot of it was in response to what we saw as being pinch points in respect of that.
And the inquiry understands that on the 8th of April 2020, so we're moving forward a couple more weeks in a timeline of rapidly moving events, the Chancellor announced a £750 million emergency funding package to support the sector. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And you described that in your statement as a figure that had been reached by negotiation between your department, the Department of Health and Social Care, and the Treasury. Is that right?
That's correct, yes. And of course, it is also worth noting, for completeness, that a package of this size would also attract the interest of 10 Downing Street as well.
Yes, thank you. So that was £750 of additional monies and a support in addition to the pan-economic support that you've described.
Yes, 750 million, yes.
Sorry, did I
you missed off the million. Yes.
Well, what's a million between friends, I could say, but no, that's an important correction, so thank you. Can you assist at all in terms of how that figure was arrived at? I mean, is it more scientific of you pushed for what you could get and that was, given the other fiscal response of the government, what was available?
So it was I would say a combination of three things. So first of all, as we have discussed, the interaction between the pan economy measures and the needs of the sector. Secondly, it was specific needs from the response to COVID. So if one looks at the breakdown, particularly with the other government departments of areas where we spent money, £200 million was for hospices. There was an awful lot of attention at the time about the pressure that was on hospices. Even smaller numbers, I believe there's some money that goes to zoos. There's a lot of pressure at the time about how zoos were responding to this crisis. So there was that kind of analysis. And of course, in that context, a large chunk of it from my department came from the engagement that the Office for Civil Society had with the sector, understanding the needs and so on as set out. And then, of course, finally, there is an element of the art of the possible, that is to say what the Treasury is going to agree to. And I don't mean that to be dismissive of the Treasury, because the Treasury is the only department across the whole of government whose sole focus is on the totality of government expenditure. So they have to make the ultimate decision about how expenditure on individual schemes sets in the context of the whole of government expenditure and how that's paid for, whether it's through taxes, the bond issuance, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Now, in terms of the number, the amount of money, we've heard evidence this morning that the sector considered that the amount of money available was not adequate. It wasn't a sufficient sum of money. And the inquiry has received evidence, for example, that it was estimated that the charity sector would lose £3.69 billion of income within 12 weeks of the first lockdown. Were you thinking about this package and the sum of money in terms of what was adequate, in other words, what would replace pound for pound the money that was lost, or were you thinking about it in a different way?
I was thinking about it in a slightly different way. So And indeed, the position that was agreed with the Treasury collectively was the principal means of supporting all organisations, whether they were businesses, charities and so on, was through the pan economy measures. So that was the sort of baseline. And then I was thinking in respect of this sum about how it would address the specific needs of the sector, but specifically through the lens of those activities that were required to support people, and the hugely important role that the charitable sector played in supporting people through the COVID crisis.
Thank you. It's been suggested in evidence from Sarah Elliott from the National Council for Voluntary Organisations that the amount of money could or should be compared to the amount of money that was being given to other sectors, and that it fell below that being given to other sectors. For example, her statement refers to the 1.57 billion that was provided to the arts and culture sector. I'll just give you an opportunity to deal with that. Were you viewing, you had a lot of sectors, were you viewing this as a competition between sectors or an allocation between sectors? Were you having to balance one against the other? How were the amounts of money being determined?
No, each sector was considered on its own merits and according to its needs. It is worth noting that in respect of the comparison Sarah Elliott makes with the COVID recovery scheme for the cultural bailout, the Cultural Recovery Fund, that I believe was allocated about 3 months later. So at the time we had more of a picture of where that sector was. Remember that this package that we agreed with the Treasury in respect of the charitable sector was almost immediately after lockdown had been announced. We didn't know exactly how things were going to transpire over the coming months. Nobody knew how things were going to transpire over the coming months. So they were very different packages at different times with different needs. And I mean, I could go through the needs of the 1.57 billion, how that was derived. It was a totally different set of circumstances.
Thank you. Can I just take a slight detour from the theme of my questions, just to pick this up here, because I think it's probably as convenient a place to do so, because I've just asked you a question about that cultural sector. You established in May of 2020 the Cultural Renewal Task Force, is that right?
Yes.
And you chaired that yourself, I think.
Yes, I believe I did, yes.
Yeah. What was the remit of that task force? And can you just help us with why you created it?
So I believe that I established that, first of all, to properly understand the pressures that the sector was under. Remember, the cultural sector was very diverse. It spanned everything through film and television, and museums, galleries, the commercial theatre sector, the publicly funded commercial, the publicly funded theatre sector. So to understand what their needs were, both in respect of what financial support they might need, but also whether it was viable for them to continue to operate, because as you may recall, at different times during the COVID pandemic, we had different restrictions, the 2 meters, the indoor, outdoors, helping them to find a way through to see whether there was any cultural activity that could happen in the context of the rules that stood at the time.
Having established it, did you think it was beneficial? Did it assist you to do that?
Yes, it did. Yes, I mean, I found all engagement with the multiplicity of sectors that I dealt with helpful. It's one of the sources of information that I drew on, amongst many others, in making decisions I had to make as Secretary of State.
Okay, thank you. Can I pick that up then as a theme, the issue of consultation? Again, Sarah Elliott in her witness statement and touched on in her evidence has raised the issue that the sector really only became aware of the support package shortly before it was announced and the detail just hours in advance. And that there wasn't really, she would say, sufficient consultation with her organisation and therefore with the sector about the design of the support. What would you say to that as a complaint, if that's the right word?
Well, first of all, I appreciate her concerns. And in a normal world, when we were designing a £750 million package like this, it would have taken months and would have been the principal focus of my department. And so, in normal circumstances, I would have expected us to have several rounds of consultation and engagement to refine it. We didn't have that luxury in COVID. We wanted to get the money out of the door very, very quickly. And as you can see from the chronology, there was a very short period of time between the announcement of the lockdown and their package being announced. It was the first one out of the door. It is also always the case, though, that the Treasury is very reluctant to engage on the specifics of proposals until they are finally agreed, because it's the nature of policy making, particularly with the Treasury, that schemes change and then they change again, so they don't wish to set hares running or false expectations that then mean that people don't fully understand where they are in terms of the support. It is worth noting, though, that there was engagement. I was able to listen to some of Sarah Everett's evidence. It was very kind of her to make reference to my officials and how she and her team engaged extensively with them. That, in turn, was feeding through to me and feeding through to the Treasury, both me directly and through the directly from civil servants to civil servants. And it's also the case that I did engage with the sector. I had a round table with them, and crucially, I had an excellent junior minister in Baroness Barron, who had experience of the charitable sector, who did a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of engagement with them, and was a very valuable source of advice to me as well.
So to summarise your answer, there was consultation, and that was going on all the time with the sector. But given the pace and the need for the Treasury to sign off on the package and formally announce it, that there wasn't a blow-by-blow consultation on the precise shape of what was going to be announced. Is that a fair summary?
That's a fair summary. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Generally, did you find that the greater the consultation, that the better schemes landed and support landed, or was that not your experience?
Well, yeah, yes and no. So it's important to recall that engagement with the sector is just one way in which we derive information. So we would derive information from the experience and expertise of the officials in my department, many of whom have either worked in the sector or had been engaging with the sector for many, many years. We derive advice and information from reports that were prepared on the sector, official statistics. So all of this came together. Of course, if we had enough time, more consultation is always better. But as a department and as a government, we had to trade off the time for consultation with the speed of the response.
Thank you. Now, the monies that became available, the additional monies, were delivered through a number of different schemes. I think 7 in total. Is that right?
Yes.
We can take it as read. Why deliver the monies across lots of different schemes rather than have one central scheme that could provide support?
Well, it was to reflect the different needs of the sector. So the fund that was allocated to other government departments was a reflection of specific needs, principally that had already been identified by those departments. Those departments had the existing relationships. So, for example, DHSC had the relationship with the hospices sector. The take another example I've used, DEFRA would have had the relationship with the zoo, so it made more sense for them, having had those relationships, to get money out to those specific sectors. Additionally, if you look at the breakdown, there was we had match funding. So, for example, I think we had the big night in Children in Need. So we were aware that by providing that match funding, we were able to get more money in. And then we also, for example, had the funding for the VSCE, which was about essentially lubricating the system in terms of understanding more about the sector. So they needed support for that. And then we had the principal package that was the responsibility of the department, which was the 310 million pound charities package.
Do you think there was a danger in that approach to delivering funding that different departments were bidding for their own sectors? And effectively promoting the interests of their own sectors, and that there was any lack of transparency about who made ultimately the decision as to what money went where?
No, I don't think that was the case, because there were just certain sectors that very easily sat with a given government department. Those departments then put bids into this decision-making mechanism that we set up, a sort of star chamber. And then collective decisions were made in respect of those bids by a combination principally of DCMS and the Treasury, which you would expect to be the case. In all of this, we were seeking to get money out the door as quickly as we could to the sectors that needed it most, but at the same time trying to build a structure around it that was defensible to the public whose money we were spending.
Now, if you think about it in ordinary times, and there's a spending review and different departments make bids for money from the Treasury, I mean, do you accept in ordinary times there is an element of competition, if you like, between departments as to who can secure their funding for their programmes going forwards?
Well, I suppose there's an implicit competition, but it's not really how it feels from an individual department. What you do for an individual department is go through the needs of your department and make the case to the Treasury for your department. I was never particularly concerned in any spending review or budgetary process about the bids from other departments. That was for the Treasury to make the decision. I was concerned about the needs of the department that I represented to ensure that appropriate funds were given to them.
So as far as you're concerned, this star chamber, as you've called it, effectively worked as a way of departments could come and identify sectors that are in particular need, and then the funding could be distributed.
Yes, and it's important to remember, first of all, it's always the case that as a government we're interested in the whole interest of the nation and the government over the individual departmental interests. That was even more so the case during this once-in-a-generation crisis.
I mean, I've already touched on the sum of money that was available, but just to give you an opportunity to deal with the criticism that was made this morning that this just wasn't enough money, what would you say to that?
Well, first of all, the number of people touched by these various schemes, I believe, was about 21 million people, one way or another. So we managed to use a colloquialism, quite a lot of bang for our buck from it. Secondly, it was the case that within a year or two, contrary to many of the concerns that had been raised, we didn't see a wholesale collapse of the charitable sector. The number of charities ceasing to exist, I think it declined by about 1%, which I think was kind of roughly about where we would have expected. Although what I would say is, of course, as the responsible Secretary of State, I always wanted to get more money for the sectors for which I represented and I was passionate about. But I think I feel reasonably comfortable that it was a defensible package, but B, it did have a profound impact on many, many people.
The Coronavirus Community Support Fund, can I just ask a couple of questions about that? Do you accept or recognise that the concern that it lacked flexibility?
No, I'm afraid. I think is the short answer. I just have to be honest with you.
Well, we obviously prefer honest answers. So,
every answer is honest, I should say.
So why was it configured as it was from your perspective?
So is this the point about the alleged complexity of it? Right. I was very cognizant at the time of the need to protect the interests of the taxpayer and to make sure that we had rigorous mechanisms in place to ensure that money was allocated properly. And indeed, without wanting to comment on any of the other allegations around it, I think with the passage of time, this has been one of the public's big concerns about, was the money spent wisely? So I'm glad that we took a rigorous approach to the allocation of public resources. This was still a huge amount of money, £300 million that we were responsible for distributing.
So if we took a compare and contrast, say, between the support a business could get, apply for a bounce back loan, minimal scrutiny, and furlough staff, as against additional layers of not complexity but requirements that had to be met for this fund, would you say that the introduction of requirements was a good thing in that it was looking after public money? Or would you say it's comparing two different things, really, in terms of support? Well,
I can only really speak to the schemes for which I was responsible, and I felt that it was appropriate. Particularly, it's worth noting in this context that many of the organisations that were receiving money were receiving it for the first time. They weren't experienced with receiving it. They had limited experience of managing government funds. It included non-registered new organisations that were being given rapid emergency funding. So the judgment that I took was that it was proportionate to have this additional layer. However, as things transpired, I was always mindful of making it proportionate, and I received representations that for relatively small amounts of money, we should raise the threshold to £10,000. I felt that on balance that was a proportionate approach. But again, I think that I personally felt more comfortable with having more rigour to begin with and then easing off on the rigour than the other way around. And so one final point worth making is that if you look at the surveys that have been conducted subsequently, and I'm happy to write to the inquiry with the details of those, I believe about 3/4 of those surveyed who applied for funds under the scheme found that it was reasonably simple and straightforward. So it wasn't out of the normal bounds of what they might expect for applying to a government scheme.
Accepting that one person's rigour might be another person's layer of unnecessary complexity, depending on your perspective. Can I ask you about the National Lottery Community Fund? That was a fund that was long established. Do you accept?
Yes.
And had a long history of delivering grant funding. It knew what it was doing in ordinary times.
Yes, but it is worth noting that the scale and speed and volume of this was much, much greater than what they would deal with in normal times. So they were being asked to take on an enormous new workload in a very short period of time.
So why, if they were familiar with delivering that sort of support, bring in external consultants, PricewaterhouseCoopers, paying them, I think the estimate was about £1.4 million to do what the fund already knew how to do?
Well, first of all, for the reasons I set out, that these organisations had limited experience of managing government funds, there were non-registered new organisations, and secondly, because the scale and speed of what we were asking them to do, I took the judgment at the time that an additional layer of scrutiny would be appropriate, and as I said, when that proved not to be required in respect of those smaller sums, the department showed flexibility, or we showed flexibility in respect of it. Of course, it's always the case that as a minister, you're trading off things. You're trading off speed, rigour, complexity. But I suppose I don't... If one looks at the evidence of the people that experienced the scheme, their feedback, even afterwards, was that three-quarters of them found this was a reasonably normal level of scrutiny. And indeed, £1.4 million, although it's a large sum of money, in the context of a £300-odd million scheme, I think that would be broadly in the sort of boundaries of what one might expect around administrative costs.
So did you view that not as adding complexity so much as ensuring delivery in a time of a massive increase in applications and need?
Yes, well, I was very mindful of the fact that we were giving lots and lots of money to organisations that we didn't know terribly well, and that I wanted some more reassurance, not for me personally, but for the government as a whole and indeed the taxpayer.
Yeah. Thank you. Can I move on then to the second significant topic, which is your department's engagement with and feedback on the pan-economy measures. We've dealt with the funds that were set up, the new money, but your engagement with the wider measures that are applying across the economy, please. I think you had some particular concerns, is that right, about different aspects of the pan-economic measures so far as they affected your sector or sectors?
Yes, well, one of my responsibilities and the department's responsibilities was to engage with all the relevant sectors for which we were responsible, pick up their concerns, analyse those concerns, and if we felt that those concerns were legitimate and had merit, to engage with the Treasury about those concerns. Okay.
Can I just pick up a couple of concerns, I think, that arose from the job retention scheme? If we could have up, please, INQ 000623 page 3 of that. Yep. This was advice to you from the Economic Response Directorate of the 27th of March of 2020. And this was raising issues about zero-hours workers who are not on the PAYE payroll, arrangements for employers which are not able to cease trading or close down their services, and then give some examples, tourism companies, and at the bottom there, charities which are delivering the same or additional level of services as they would in normal circumstance, but with significantly reduced income from individual giving and grants. What did you do with that advice to take forward those concerns?
And again, I just have to put the caveat on that I don't have the covering box notes, but what I would typically do, and I'm sure, and I remember some of these very well, would be to engage with the Treasury. If I felt that those were legitimate concerns, probably my first response would be to ask for some more detail on some of these things to make sure we were on solid ground, and I might question other schemes available had they thought about doing so and so on. If I still felt that was the case, I would seek to engage with the Treasury. The usual sort of hierarchy of engagement with the Treasury would be that I would instruct or request my officials to engage with their appropriate opposite numbers in the Treasury, see if they could get some movement there. Then if they didn't have some movement there, I'd ask my political advisors to engage through political channels, and then I would engage both with the Treasury or indeed with Number 10, because it's worth noting that in Downing Street there are private secretaries and policy officials that roughly sort of cover each individual government department. So we would engage with them as appropriate as well. So we would always try and do our best by the sectors for which we were responsible, but ultimately accepting that the Treasuries are the ultimate custodians, both of these schemes. They designed them, so they were responsible for them, and they were the ultimate custodians of public money.
Now, we heard this morning a concern raised about the fact that one of the features of the job retention scheme, particularly in the charity sector, was that you couldn't be furloughed and then volunteer within the charity that had furloughed you. though you could volunteer with with another charity, and obviously that might sound like a good idea, but it might not match the skill of the charity worker with the particular charity. Rather than looking back over that, can we look forward? If there was ever a need for another job retention scheme, do you consider that a carve out for the charity sector that would enable furlough of employees in the charity sector and volunteering within their own charity would be A, a good idea, B, deliverable?
Well, I made the case at the time extensively that they should be able to volunteer within their own sector. The legitimate pushback that we had from the Treasury was that how would that sit in terms of fraud? So the concern that probably less from the charitable sector, but from elsewhere, that companies could furlough someone and then get them to volunteer for that sector and sort of get benefit twice, both the furlough scheme and then the benefits of the services of that person. Of course, with the benefit of time, if we could design a scheme working with the Treasury with sufficient time that we could really test it, that it was robust enough, that we could find a way of enabling those charities to allow their staff to re-volunteer, I think it would have to specifically be to deliver specific COVID-related functions, then of course I'd like that to be the case. And we did try and find a way of doing it. We just never got to a point where the Treasury could be sufficiently satisfied that it met those concerns.
So you would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you're saying lots of good policy reasons generally why the Treasury would be concerned about that sort of ability to volunteer back for fraud reasons and so on and so forth. But the charity sector is a different sector, and if it could be done in a secure way that avoided the potential for fraud, that's something that you would support going forward.
Well, yes, both the potential for fraud, but also, again, there is a need to protect value for money for the taxpayer, because if it was the case that across all activities of a charitable sector, they were able to get the benefit of the furlough money, and then have all of their staff working, then I think that would probably put excessive demands on the public purse. So I think my inclination, what I'd hoped we could try and get to a point, was to have it targeted at those delivering frontline services that were required at the time of the COVID crisis.
Yes, or any future crisis.
Indeed, any future related crisis, of course.
Understood. So those who were delivering services that were tackling the immediate crisis, whatever that may be at the time, in an emergency sense.
Yes, and I should say, in defence of the Treasury, the Treasury can speak for itself, there wasn't a sort of lack of understanding from them about the issue. We just couldn't get to a point where it worked.
Was there any sense in which there was a concern within government that the more complicated you started to make these schemes and the ability of businesses or charities to apply for them, that would start to defeat the purpose of the scheme?
And of course, that was always a trade-off, and particularly when we were going back to the Treasury once the pan economy schemes had been designed, saying, can we tweak this or can we tweak that? Every iteration means, and this is how government works, a whole fresh set of guidance goes out, new rules, and you've already got organisations that are applying under an old scheme, then you put out new rules. It just makes things more challenging.
Thank you. Can I move on to the business interruption loan schemes? It's right, isn't it, that the concerns were raised with you that some charities were struggling to access funding through the loan schemes?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
And what did you do in reaction to that?
Well, this was the point about, I think, 50% of their income needed to come from trading, and that was one of the areas where we were successful in convincing the Treasury to tweak the rules, which I think benefited a number of charities.
Yeah. we understand that after engagement, the Treasury prohibited lenders requiring personal guarantees, for example, and changed other elements, as you've said, of the 50% rule. And was that, in your view, a particular success for the charity sector? Was that what was driving your engagement with the Treasury on that?
Well, we were driven by doing what was right, and my belief was that this was a sensible change that would benefit the charitable sector. But it's also worth noting that the wider public benefit then of those organisations being able to draw on additional resources.
Can I then give you an opportunity to look ahead and share learning and reflections from your time as Secretary of State during the pandemic? I know you set out in your statement that generally you consider that the department stepped up well and obtained funding from the Treasury. Can I just ask you, first of all, about the COVID-19 analytical hub that you set up, and whether there were particular benefits from that hub, and if so, what they were and how they might apply going forwards?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we faced when COVID struck was that we had this very wide array of different sectors which we were responsible, some of whom we'd engage with more, others we'd engage with less, and most of them were putting new demands on us, rightly. They were asking us to provide support for them, to engage with the Treasury on their behalf. So we did find, in respect particularly of those sectors that we didn't normally engage with in respect of that issue. So, for example, in the context we've been discussing charities, OCS wouldn't historically have engaged that much with charities about a direct funding package provided by DCMS to them. So it's certainly a lesson for me that we need it in future. It would have been better to have had more information about the specific needs of those sectors in respect of financial support that they might need. That in turn could have helped us in the earlier engagement with the Treasury, but more importantly going forward, when for the Treasury to sort of have a war book, as it were, of understanding these things in more detail. The analytic function was an attempt to improve our understanding across the board, and indeed I think I then subsequently appointed a director of analytics, I think in March or something of the following year. So that was one of the gaps that we sought to close up.
Did you find generally that the first of all that the analytical or the quality of the analytical product you were getting got better over time?
Yes, broadly, yes. Of course, but if not for the simple fact that we just simply had more time to draw in more information and process it over time. In those very early days of the pandemic, we were trying to do a huge amount in a very, very short period of time.
And generally, did you find as Secretary of State that the better the analysis, the better the decisions that were made by the department?
Yes, I think probably the principal way in which that manifested itself was I'd go back asking less questions. So more questions would have been answered in the initial piece of advice, and so I'd have to request less information subsequently.
Do you think that there was a challenge in communicating and engaging with the vast number of businesses and sectors that fell under your remit? And if you do, is there anything that could be done going forwards to facilitate better engagement in a future emergency?
I think it's difficult to see how one could sort of square the circle, as it were, between having a very wide variety of different departments, areas for which we're responsible, and the short period of time that we had to engage with them. Every single one of them was making legitimate demands of us in terms of communications, from the newspapers that were worried that they were going to go bust because there were no physical newspapers being sold, to the broadband companies that thought that their infrastructure would crumble under the pressure of everyone working from home and doing video calls and so on. So I think I think broadly what we did was correct, led by my very good permanent secretary. We shifted resources from all the other different areas into the front line of dealing with the crisis. I think the risk is that if we put too many resources into communications, for most of normal activity, those will be surplus to requirements. So I think that is just, in terms of any recommendations the inquiry would choose to make, it's how one balances having too much idle or too many idle resources that aren't being used outside of a crisis situation.
Well, Sir Oliver, thank you. Those are my questions. I think there are, my lady, some questions from core participants.
There are. Ms Beattie, who sits just there.
Sir Oliver, I ask questions on behalf of national disabled people's organisations, being organisations that are majority-led, directed, staffed and governed by disabled people, as distinct from charities. The National Lottery Community Fund guidance that was used for the Coronavirus Community Support Fund suggested that priority should be given to organisations that are primarily led by people with lived experience. And said this applies throughout the whole organisation, including senior management and board representation, and also priority to organisations that are currently and historically underfunded, for example, disabled people's organisations. But that being so, that intention wasn't actually within the guidance carried through into the description of 3 priority organisations that would be earmarked for that funding. So my question is, did any reviews of that Coronavirus Community Support Fund assess and look at whether funds in fact went to representative organisations, being ones such as DPO, which are primarily led by people with that lived experience as distinct from charities?
I'm afraid I can't give you that answer now, but I'm very happy to write back in terms of the reviews that were undertaken in terms of the extent to which it manifested itself in terms of the resources that were given to those disabled-led organisations. It certainly, as you say, it was reflected in the criteria that was provided for it. And it was something we were mindful of as a government, and indeed we were governed by in all our decisions by the public sector equality duty to bear these things in mind.
And I think, did we also see it actually as part of the grant management and reporting requirements that was coming from the fund into the department about whether those organisations were in fact receiving, applying and being given those grants? Do you remember seeing that kind of analysis coming in?
I can't recall. That's not to say that I didn't see it. What I do recall, though, and indeed in the conversations that we had around the designing of the scheme, was first of all to make sure that the scheme addressed those concerns, and making sure, in terms of discharging our public sector equality duty, making sure that groups most in need had access to the schemes. And it was also the case, I think, that when we had, subsequently as the crisis went on, the Cabinet Office certainly looked at groups that required more support as well. So it was something that was front of mind throughout the period of time. What I can't refer you to now, and I'm happy to write back on, is the specifics of how that may have manifested itself in advice that I received.
And do you think that grant criteria could be better designed to ensure that it does get to such organisations?
I mean, I think I'm afraid without pulling it up in front of me, I can't say for certain, but I do seem to recall that one of the criteria specifically dealt with this. Of course, as I made the point in evidence previously, there's always ways that we can refine this, and if we had had more time to design it in more detail, I would have liked us to have engaged more with more organisations to make sure that we could ensure that guidance was absolutely bespoke to the needs of those sectors.
So in the event of a future pandemic, do you think that both disabled people's organisations and the National Council for Voluntary Organisations could be better involved in helping to determine and shape that kind of support package?
Yes, what I would rather is that they were, we talked about a war book sort of plans for COVID going forward, that we had that engagement before in terms of our general resilience planning. What I can't say is that if we were faced with the same situation again, we may well find the same problem of just the speed of engagement, which meant that we did engage with disability organisations, but it tended to be more through other representative organisations of different charities. We just didn't have the time to engage with every single organisation. It tended to be more representative organisations of different groups of charities. But I certainly think that is an important consideration.
Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Ms Beattie. Mr Jacobs. Mr Jacobs is over that way. So
oh, sorry, right.
Sir Oliver, some questions on behalf of the Trades Union Congress. Yes. As I know you were acutely aware, many in the creative industries found themselves out of work, but also, because of the nature of their employment, also ineligible for support, whether under the job retention scheme or the self-employed scheme. We understand from your statement that it was raised with the Treasury by your department. Why was it that ultimately there wasn't a deviation from the pan-economic approach, or pan-economy approach as you've described it, in order to address the problem with sector-specific support?
Well, I believe rather like the issue of volunteering, and we covered off, it was finding a way that we could do this that address the concerns of the sector. So I think some of the issues related, for example, to whether those people have been trading for long enough to be able to provide sufficient accounts to do so. There was also, I think, an issue separately. There was an issue around thresholds, where I believe there was a cut-off, I think, at £50,000. Ultimately, the Treasury took the view that in terms of protecting public funds, they didn't want to raise that threshold across the board. What I should say, though, is that I was very mindful of this, both in terms of the Cultural Recovery Fund, and that's one of the reasons why we came to quite a large sum for the Cultural Recovery Fund. I did try to encourage in the distribution of that, see how we could support the self-employed and the creatives, and why latterly I was very keen to get sectors to reopen to create opportunities. For example, we managed to do that with the Film and Television Restart Scheme.
Sir Oliver, you've helpfully pointed to some of the causes of those gaps that were felt particularly keenly in the creative industries. But that doesn't necessarily explain why there wasn't a sector-specific package for those working in the sector. Do I understand that it was really a practical problem?
So I think principally it was about when we engaged with the Treasury, we couldn't find a way of making that work from a practical perspective. But I would just like to pick up on the point that you made about the sector-specific scheme. There was the £1.57 billion Culture Recovery Fund. Now, of course, that was not directly aimed at creatives and the self-employed, but by getting resources to those organisations, it created opportunities for them. So there was some indirect support that way. But of course, it's a regret of mine that we couldn't find a way of doing that, and I was acutely aware of the pressures that those individuals were under.
And on this point, at paragraph 116 of your statement, you describe having raised this point with the Treasury. You say ultimately the collectively agreed approach was to take broad measures, and then you say in future resilience planning should develop a more detailed understanding within sectors of employment types so we have a clearer view at the outset. What would or should that more detailed understanding lead to in terms of perhaps the war book, to use your phrase?
Yes. So the trade-off that we were making was between a simplicity and bespoke schemes. I think that if we had more time and in designing it in future, with time, I would hope that we could find a way of designing the self-employed support scheme in such a way that it would capture more creatives than we managed to do. So that wasn't from a lack of will on the department side, nor I think from the Treasury side. It was just how we could tailor that scheme as it was at the time to meet those needs. With more time, I would hope that we could find something that met those needs.
And with more time, might it be that rather than perhaps seeing simplicity of a pan-economic scheme with a bespoke scheme, that actually a bespoke scheme could be supplementary? It could overlay a national scheme.
Well, I think the challenge with that is that one can end up in the situation where there's a myriad of bespoke schemes. So I did support the position that the Treasury took, which was to try and have a pan-economy scheme that did what it said on the tin, helped all sectors, because there's a benefit of that as simplicity. So I would rather that the approach for doing it would be to design the pan-economy schemes in such a way as they captured more self-employed, rather than overlaying the pan-economy scheme with a myriad of bespoke schemes for different sectors.
But the outcome either way should be narrowing the gaps.
I would very much hope so, yes.
My lady, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs. That completes the questions we have for you, Sir Oliver. Thank you very much indeed for your help and for coming back for a second time and preparing the witness statement. You've offered very kindly to produce more information to save you unnecessary work, or your former colleagues unnecessary work. The inquiry will contact you if it needs more from you, if that suits you.
Great, thank you very much.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much again. Really great. Very well, I shall return at 25 to 2.